Welcome to the Podcast Superfriends. 5 podcast producers from across North America get together to discuss podcasting.
Welcome to this month's edition of the Podcast Superfriends. I'm John Gay from JAG In Detroit Podcasts here outside Detroit, Michigan. Today we're talking about not TIL, but YIL. Yesterday, I learned. We're going to start by going around the horn, introducing everybody. Normally, we go north of the border to Canada, but today we're going to go across the ocean to start, over to Spain, and Matt Kundle.
Matt Kundle from the Soundoff Media Company, where this month and next month we are going to be residing in Malaga, Spain.
The remote office. We'll head next to my hometown of Boston.
Yeah, Boston, the Spain of the West, right? Anyway, David Yaz, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network.
And next to my former home of Louisiana and Baton Rouge, who just muted herself.
And now
We don't
can't
hear you.
her.
Luckily, you have 4 producers on the line with you. So
This stuff always happens. All right, we'll head to the home of Podcast Movement 2025, and that will be Texas.
Glad to be back. I missed last month because my wife and I had a baby. So we got third little head in the household. And speaking of going on mute, if that does happen, it is because there's a screaming 1-month-old in the background.
And what's your name?
I'm Johnny Podcasts, and I never knew what TIL meant. So TIL, I learned, or TIL.
Ah, that's
So,
very.
I would always
meta
read
of
it
you.
online and go, I just would skip over it mentally, whatever TIL said, and read the rest of the post, and never knew or had the gumption to look it up. So glad we learned something today.
That's what we do, is we teach people things here today, Johnny. All right, let's try Baton Rouge again.
No, we cannot hear.
Still nothing from Baton Rouge.
She's going to leave
working.
and come back. We
Okay.
read her lips.
All
She's
right.
going to leave and come back.
All right. It's funny because before she was having hearing trouble, but now she's having speech trouble. So now she's got all the problems out of the way early.
You know, and it's something that I'm sure as the three of you do, I always tell clients, which is, you know, there's always a tech hiccup, whether it's a client I've been working with for 6 weeks or a client I've been working with for 6 months or 6 years. That's why sometimes clients will hire me to hop on just the beginning, first 5 minutes of a call, make sure everybody's audio and video is dialed in, because
Yeah.
if COVID taught us anything, it's there's always a gremlin in the system somewhere.
I always push it on my clients. I always say, like, I have to join before every recording, and they go, "Oh, I think we've got it locked in, Johnny. Like, I think you can skip this one." And I go, I thank you for that, but for just the way things are, this will be the one where everything goes wrong, just because I didn't fix one little thing beforehand. So
Easier to fix it in pre than post.
exactly.
Catherine, are you with us?
Dare I try once again?
Yes.
Good. Oh, great. I'm wearing the headphones that I didn't want to wear, and I touched the wire and it went out. So we'll see how we do for this whole thing. Hey, it's Catherine O'Brien. I'm from formerly a Spanish colony, Baton Rouge. We fell, Louisiana Purchase, all those good things. We once were Spain. So that's my claim to fame for the Spain theme of the day.
And you've got Entergy there, the power company. I think they've got a problem, or that's in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge too. They're causing an electrical issue for you with your cords, I think.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Not the
that's what
best
I'm blaming,
infrastructure down there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about some stuff that we've all learned recently in the podcasting industry. And I think I want to start with Dave, because Dave sent us a great email about some stuff he picked up recently from a webinar he was on. So let's start with my cousin from Boston.
From Boston, yeah. So Podmatch came up with a report which is not only revealing, but also really good news for independent podcasters. A lot of us who produce podcasts, a lot of us who host podcasts, there's a natural tendency for people to compare you to, like, you know, Joe Rogan or someone who's got a zillion followers. And part of the result of this survey is that even if you make it past, let's see, if you make it to 10 episodes, you're already in the top 50% of all podcasts. If you make it to 100 episodes, you're in the top 5%. 95% of podcasters quit before reaching that point, though. So it's crazy. And the other kind of big thing that jumped out is only 6% of all independent podcasters are considered actively established, which I'm not sure exactly what that means, but they account for 95% of the total podcast listenership. So this is what I'm beating around the bush here, but this medium is not dominated by entertainment companies, as you might think. It's dominated by you. It's dominated by independent podcasters. And so that is really the beating heart of the podcast industry are people who either do it themselves or do it with independent producers like us. And I think that's great. And the last thing I'll mention is, and then I'll take questions from the floor. The last thing I'll mention is if your podcast gets 100 downloads in the first 7 days, a given episode, you're in the top 25% of all podcasts. So it's if you're struggling and you're only at like 100, downloads per episode, it's okay. First of all, it does take, as many as 100 episodes to find that audience. But if you're getting up to, let's say the numbers, 460 downloads, that's the top 10%. So if you're in the hundreds, you're in the ballpark. So it's just know that. And of course, know how valuable it is being an independent podcaster. You're probably reaching a niche audience that most media cannot reach.
2 points on that, Dave. So one, I think it's not fair to compare podcast downloads to social media likes, comments, shares, things like that, because it's not apples to apples. I would take 20 podcast listeners over 500 Facebook likes. Liking a Facebook post doesn't take any effort at all. But if you're talking about someone who is going to take the time and interact with your content and give you their attention for a podcast, what would it be worth to a client to be in a conference room while you were addressing 50 people? They'd probably pay big bucks for that. So I'm so glad you mentioned that download metric. You mentioned active podcasts. From what I remember from Rob Walsh's usual annual presentation of Podcast Movement, their criteria for that was reach 10 episodes and put something out in the last 90 days. So if they're using the same metrics, I think that's what they would consider active.
Yeah, and the big number there is there are, according to Podmatch, 2.7 million podcasts, but only 390,000 of those are active. So that's 14%. So wow. It's, we preach consistency and have a plan and don't pod fade after like 3 episodes. If you stick with it, you're already kind of an elite company. So it's such an approachable, reachable, touchable, goals that are right there for you.
And I think the easiest way to not pod fade, David, is to not concern yourself so much with the downloads. Like the downloads are the downloads. What do you, and I guess I would pose this to the rest of the panel too, what do you guys tell clients, especially new ones, where you're not taking on a show where you're taking over production, but you're helping launch a new podcast? You always get the question, well, okay, we've released the first couple episodes. Here's our download numbers. Is this normal? What should these numbers be looking like? And normally what I tell them is, before we've even launched the show, we've established the goal that is outside of what our download numbers are. Our goal is to achieve X with this podcast, whether it's to grow our own personal brand, create some social media content for your Twitter or for your LinkedIn, or to help bring brand awareness to your company or drive new clients to your business. It's not so much the fact that we've got 100 downloads or we've got 200 downloads. It's more a fact is who those 100 people are. So what do you guys normally, because you've all gotten this question over the years, what do you normally tell them?
You've said it already, John. It's you can't compare it to other big numbers. You can't compare it to like, a Facebook will tell you if you pay for this ad, you're going to reach 10,000 people. Yeah. Isn't that 10,000 is much better than 100, right? Well, it's not even close to apples. Podcasting is the most intimate delivery of information, of content that there is out there. We know this. We've seen numbers that when people click on a podcast, they are, like something like 80 to 90% are likely to listen to most or all of the whole episode.
That's right.
So it is that kind of, intimacy that you get from if you were holding a breakfast series and there were 36 people showing up every Friday morning, you'd think that was fantastic. You're connecting people with people, and probably the right people that came specifically to hear your content. It is much more akin to that. So I'm with you. I mean, it's nice to look at the download numbers. We all love it when we get big download numbers, but you got to put it in perspective. You can't compare it to any other kind of metric, social media especially.
I'll echo that, Dave. People get intimidated when they see that number that there are roughly 3 million podcasts out there. Well, you're not competing against 3 million. As you can see on the screen if you're watching the video version of this, you're competing against 390,000. Or if you were to compare that to the number of blogs out there, it's not even close. So your competition is not as stiff as you might think. Another thing I do, to Johnny's point about pod fading, or both of you have mentioned this already, when I sign a client on, I sign them up for a finite number of episodes, and we call it a season. It could be 5 episodes, it could be 10 episodes. And the idea there is you don't take on this project that it's every week from now until eternity, and it becomes one more burdensome thing in your to-do list. The idea is we do 5, we do 10, we map out the content. It's an achievable goal. And at the end of the 5 or the 10, they say, hey, Jag, we love doing this. We're going to keep doing with season 2. Or, hey, you know what? I enjoyed this, but this isn't for me. My attention is elsewhere, and no problem. And you're on your way. And you don't have this axe of Damocles hanging over your head of, oh my gosh, I've got to do another podcast this week.
Yeah, I think managed expectations from the very beginning are important. I think that we've long preached on the Podcast Super Friends that you have to be looking for engagement. One of my clients, I use this example a lot. She gets an email every single week. First of all, we give the listeners a way to reach out to her through the show notes. And she actually does get emails from listeners saying what they appreciated, what they liked, all those kinds of things. So that engagement is, she might not have otherwise heard from anybody in what she's doing, but she's hearing from the listeners because we ask them and we give them a way to do it. And that's a really great way to see some sort of return on the podcast.
I'm so glad you mentioned email, Catherine, because as we see increasingly wonky things going on with social media, whether on all sides, email is the database that you control. You're not relying on Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg to decide if they're going to show your content to folks. You are ending up in people's email boxes, and it's a way to communicate with them directly without any third-party involvement, which leads me to Matt's yesterday I learned.
Oh, I wasn't ready to go there yet.
Okay.
I wanted to talk very quickly just about the 390,000 active podcasts that are out there. And, for those who are rushing into YouTube, would you prefer to maybe, I hate the word compete, but to market against the podcasts that are out there rather than the millions of videos that are going up every day? I mean, it just seems like it's just so obvious that you want to be in podcasting and have audio and have an RSS feed and maybe not rush into YouTube, because that's a much bigger ballgame.
I want to qualify that point, Matt, because you said, not rushing into YouTube. Do you mean not rushing into video? Because I think there's value in having your audio podcast populate to YouTube for SEO.
I mean, putting video first.
Okay.
I
think that's fair. Yeah. And you're right, Matt. It's silly. Like if you got into podcasting for a reason, because this was the way you wanted to build your content through these, sometimes long form interviews and things that you don't get in a 60-second TikTok video for sure. So I know you're skeptical about going all in on video. I kind of am too, but I'm at a point now where the people I help, we do the video. It's not meant to be like a slickly edited, like, TV news show or something, but it's up there. And, so I'm kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I guess. But being on YouTube, it helps. It seems like it's a little easier to get clicks on YouTube than it is downloads. But I'm with you. Let's not forget, how this medium was born and like what the true spirit of it is. It's conversations,
Yes. Yeah. I actually had something I did learn this week. There was a fault with my pod page. It's since been fixed, but what happened was all the videos started to autoplay from YouTube. And I'm like, that's just going to run the numbers up on videos.
Yeah.
Because we're, an IAB certified download is not supposed to autoplay by any stretch. So I called them on it, and it was apparently a bug, and they fixed it. But it's just one of the things that's sort of talks about the imbalance between video and audio.
And Matt, you've seen the numbers too, I believe, that consumption tends to be a lot better on the audio side on Apple and Spotify, et cetera, than on YouTube, correct?
Yeah, it's just so much easier to move on to something else on YouTube, which is great because you can, just find that search bar and find something else quickly. But, consumption is just much better in the audio space.
I have yesterday I learned a YIL.
Yield.
Okay, so we've all been hearing, like over the last couple of years, the whole term, oh, AI is coming for podcasting. AI is here. And then there's a new term that comes out, which I'm sure you guys have seen online, which is AI agents. We've got agents deployed in our SaaS company. If you sign up for our business, you'll get your own personalized AI agent. And I was like, what the hell is an AI agent? So I asked my wife, and she's just like, yeah, it's just a fancy word for just a ChatGPT bot that you've built. It's just a prompt that is given to a large language model that then spits it out. But it's fancy to call it an agent. Like, oh, I've got an agent working for me. So all that to say, in your podcasting process, whether you're a producer, whether you're a host who's running their own show, if you're touching any part of your podcast outside of just recording the spoken word, you can build an AI agent for a ton of the backend work that needs to be done for your podcast. And we just built one yesterday for one of my clients. So I get a text from a client's assistant. He says, or she says to me, hey, can you send us some social media options for promoting this episode? And I said back to them, I was like, oh, I'm not going to, maybe I didn't say this to them, but in my brain, I go, I don't want to write out this stuff for this episode for you to just post on LinkedIn and Twitter. So I sent back, I said, I'm not responsible for creating the written social content, but what I'm happy to do is to create a prompt for you to put into ChatGPT that will just give you the social content. So what I did is I go over into ChatGPT and I create a new agent that is the agent creator. And I said, you are now my agent creator. I will tell you to create a ChatGPT agent for X, and you will assist me in creating a prompt that can be fed into ChatGPT in order to create this agent. You should be asking lots of questions to help us get as much information as possible so that we create the most detailed prompt possible for the creation of these agents. Always be thinking about how we can make the prompt better, more detailed, and overall smarter for the prompt. And they said, great, let's get started. What I did is basically said, you are going to pull information from this podcast, which can be found here on YouTube, here on Spotify, and to create social content for these two social media accounts, one on X, one on LinkedIn. And basically it created an entire prompt that is going to give them multiple post options for LinkedIn, for X, in different tones, different calls to actions, different parts of an episode, takeaways, things like that. It's going to give them about 6 options each. And all that the human has to do is just put in the transcript and say the words, create social content, and it'll spit it all out. So rather than just creating one time or social content for one episode one time, they now have the opportunity to do it every single time just by plugging in the transcript. So if you just set a little time aside now, you save so much time in the long run by creating one of these ChatGPT bots, or agents as we're calling them now. But you can do that for a ton of different aspects of the post-production side of podcasting and get your message out farther, wider, faster.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, Johnny, but I do have a follow-up question for you. So when you are originally setting up your agent, shaken, not stirred, or however this agent works, are you giving it the links to where the podcast is, and do those links include transcripts? Because you got to feed it some sort of text, right?
So we're taking so I'm putting the episode into Descript, which is transcribing it. Or if I have my team doing the actual transcription, like the really fully cleaned up one, that is being attached into the text box with the prompt, generate social content. And the agent knows based on the prompt, it says your inputs from the human will be, you are pulling everything from the transcript. So I went in and asked, I said, are you able to actually read or pull any data from the Spotify or the YouTube link? And they go, no, we can't actually do that yet. So I'm sure that's in the works, but they can't yet. So you have to give them something. You can't just say like, do it for my latest episode. Maybe in a year we'll be able to do that. But for now, you need to give them the full transcript. And so far they do a really, really good job of doing it.
It's just like Google can search, text as opposed to video or
audio
content.
Yeah. So I have ChatGPT agents that are doing time codes. I have them that are doing titles for episodes. I have them that are doing episode descriptions. And it's more than just so-and-so is the CEO of this company and they've worked here for 10 years. It is, welcome back to this show. Today I'm sitting down with blah, 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 blah. Here are 10 bullet points of everything we talked about. Here are the links to everything that was mentioned. And it's all just like that. But you have to know how to create that kind of stuff. And you just take some time and, utilize ChatGPT or any of these large language models to say, help me get this going. And it's going to take a few hours and a few tries, but once you do it and get it right, then you're set.
Well, the client, your person you're working with, still has to go back and find, if they're going to make a video clip, I take it they still have to find the part in the video that corresponds to the part in the transcript that ChatGPT has identified, right?
Yes, or the way that we built it was not necessarily that it would be paired with an image or a video. It's strictly text-based content. So normally, so if one of the posts, for instance, is just an overall post promoting the episode, then we can combine it with either for LinkedIn. LinkedIn only allows the first 15 minutes of an episode. We'll attach the first 15 minutes of an episode and then add something into the post saying like, here's the first 15 minutes. If you want to watch the rest, go to YouTube. Or for X or Twitter, you can post the whole episode and still have all of that. But what they're looking for is just the written content. No one wants to sit down and actually think about it and write it out. And we want to just give it to us.
Yeah, I've had good success using the AI tool in Descript, which we talk about all the time. We're fans of Descript. And it's great for writing show notes. It's great for if it generates a blog post from the transcript. And if you've never used this, people, you should try it. It's pretty amazing. You don't want to rely on it. You want to check that text to make sure the robot hasn't done anything stupid. But Descript also has tools to create clips using a video. Excuse me. But I haven't had success doing that seamlessly yet. I don't know if any of you have, but maybe we're too in the weeds now. But
and Riverside also offers similar processes as Descript does. I've played with both, and I think they're kind of in this arms race where they're leapfrogging each other in terms of which is better. But they're fairly similar products. One caveat I'll throw out to this using AI for generating content. I'm working with a marketing firm who just said that Google is now getting smarter at detecting what's been written by AI.
Correct.
So one way to do it is like Johnny said, to make really, really specific prompts. But I would strongly urge anybody who's creating written content with AI to go through and do some light editing to make it sound less robotic and more human, or less agent-like and more human, because Google is starting to downrank in search results exclusively written AI content and prioritize what's been written by actual people. Catherine?
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And I also just kind of want to give a shout out to some of the other tools that we're fans of. For Johnny's point about using these prompts, a lot of the tools that we're using already have built in these agents to make the social contact for us. So I want to just give a shout out to Headliner, that we're all fans of Headliner for doing audiograms. Their tools for AI for coming up with social content, I think, are getting really good. And then to your point, Jag, I just wanted to say that somebody who I follow, Neil Patel, about SEO, he says that one of the things to keep in mind is it's AI plus human. So everything that's being generated by an AI tool, it really, if you just use that human touch, that human screening, that's going to get you a lot further than just using the straight up AI.
Yeah.
That's generally been my rule for anything AI, even AI audio editing, things like Descript and Riverside and Adobe Enhance and things like that. You can run poor quality audio through it. It'll do a pretty good job, but you have to make tweaks because sometimes it'll lop off an S or an F at the end of a word. And now your host, your guest sounds like they have a lisp that they don't typically have, or other things. So anything you run through AI has to be completely hand checked by a human eye and or ear.
And I think that I get some of from the people that Johnny's interacting with on Twitter or X. I see some of the things. I've been noticing a lot of the people who are focusing on AI are really breaking down which AI tool is best for which platform. So AI tools they have different skill sets, so they're better in some arenas than others. So it's been kind of interesting to see, like, oh, don't use Grok for this, use Grok for that. Use Claude for blog posts, don't use Claude for research, whatever it happens to be. It's kind of interesting to see who's being enhanced in different ways, what their skill sets are.
Matt, are you ready for your Yesterday I Learned?
Yes, I am.
Go for it.
I think X is kind of done in my world. And it's just, I've just watched the metrics go, and I'm a big fan. I've been there for a long time. And, in the end, it's not really me who left. It's my audience has left. I can't tag anybody anymore. And these are media people, and they're gone. And if they're gone, what am I doing here? Even though we're on X right now, by the way, streaming live to X, and yeah, they're fine with it, but they're really asking for me to upload video to it. Again, my audience isn't there for, the Soundoff podcast and a number of other ones. I can't remember the last time I was sort of offered an opportunity to listen to a podcast on there. They don't really want me leaving. They want me engaging. And mostly it's politics. So I kind of really, really wondering what I'm being fed and what the purpose is of this platform. It just doesn't seem to be cohesive with the people I'm trying to attract to listen to the podcasts that we put out. That's it. I love you, Twitter. Love you, X, but it might be time to break up.
I think there is a bit of an opportunity for podcasting here in this increasing political divide we've seen on social media, where we've seen, I'm generalizing here, there are exceptions I know, we've seen Twitter X shift a little bit to the right. We saw the responses from Blue Sky and Threads shift left. And I think because these platforms are becoming more and more polarizing, and I don't want that when I'm scrolling social. I want dog videos and podcasts. So there's definitely an opportunity for podcasting to fill a void, I believe, there.
I think Instagram might be the big winner out of all this.
You don't mean Threads, you mean Instagram.
Either or, but I don't know that there's enough people on Threads
I don't
to make
think
that
yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
But I think Instagram has become a very simple way to promote your podcast.
How?
A reel, very easy, like a reel. TikTok is, as well for that matter. But here's the reel. There's a one-click method that can get somebody to Spotify very, very quickly, just in stories. You guys know it because I promote this show by doing it that way. You just click it once, and people go there. It's anytime you can reduce it to one click to get to where you need to go to be listening is a good thing.
Yeah, and that's the big problem with X and a lot of the text-based social media platforms is they de-rank you if you post a link into a post. LinkedIn does this, X does this, I'm sure Threads does this. They don't want you leaving the app ever. And no social app wants that, but those ones really, they just will nail you. And they try to offset it with, oh, well, you can upload the whole episode here. But like eventually in 5 seconds, I'm going to want to keep scrolling my timeline, or I'm going to want to switch out of the app and go do something else. And unless I have the paid version of X, I can't do that. And I hear where you're coming from, Matt, for sure.
I don't know, you guys. I enjoy feeling like I'm shouting into the void every single day. That's why I spend time on Twitter. It could not be that people aren't appreciating my dazzling sense of humor. I mean, come on.
I think, we talked about that one click, and I think Tom Webster sent that in an email or in a Sounds Profitable, and I think that probably segues into his recent webinar. Was it Catherine that you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah. And it's actually a little bit of a shout out back to some of the topics we've already covered today. So I went to the Sounds Profitable. First of all, happy webinar season. It seems like we are back into webinar season. Matt is going to be busy every 1 p.m. Thursday. We're going to be all booked.
And Wednesdays now. They seem to want to.
Oh, Wednesdays now too.
Wednesdays as well.
Yeah. So for all who celebrate webinar season, that's me. We wish you a happy webinar season. So I got the pleasure of attending the Sounds Profitable branded podcast webinar. It was great. They had a couple of people, the host of Amazon's This Is Small Business, she was there talking. And then we had Liz Harns, also from JAR Audio. And this is a deep cut, but I'm a big fan of JAR Audio because they've got some great information about branded podcasting. And Liz Harns gave us a great new metric to pay attention to, kind of a shout out back to what we were just talking about the idea of engagement with your podcast. She said that when they're talking to clients, brands specifically about launching podcasts, is that they say because of the high consumption level of the podcast, consider this minutes spent with brand. So just like we were just talking about a minute ago with social media, that's ephemeral. Social media is passing by, moment to moment to moment. You're liking, you're moving on, you're scrolling. People are not staying with you. So for all of the expense and the thought that goes into having a really cool social media post, people are passing it by just in a moment's notice. They see it and they move on to the next. Whereas with your podcast, as they're consuming more and more of it, consider that to be minutes spent with your brand. Then she took it one step further and said, okay, so now whatever cost you put into producing this podcast, you can say that, you can calculate that as minutes spent of attention. And I thought, and she says that when they break it down that way for clients, all the marketing people, their ears perk up. Like they get really interested because they're saying, okay, so this is the dollar per minute spent on the attention that this person is having with our brand. And I thought, okay, this is a really nice way of sort of tweaking it. So instead of just celebrating like, oh, yes, people consume more of the podcast. You're paying for the attention of the listener, that you're paying for the attention of this potential client or customer. And I thought, okay, that's a great way to just sort of tweak a little bit more, get a little bit deeper into our engagement numbers there.
It's a great metric.
And again, credit to Liz
classic-
Harens for sharing that.
Such a classic, beautiful corporate jargon term that they've come up with. I could see marketing people just salivating over that. You talk when you're like, they loved it. They loved hearing time spent with brand. I went, ooh, that's so fancy.
Excuse me, you were talking about AI agents and SaaS. You had one more jargon word, and we would
We're
take
hitting all of them. We all have our spectrum of the buzzwords that we like to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is what I'm embracing.
But that's another time spent
I've left
listening
everybody
metric,
speechless. Great.
right? Another time spent listening requests, which is really, I think, where we're moving to in this. Not always very helpful when you have a podcast, say like the one Jag does, 5-6 minutes long. We're not going to get some very good metrics out of that. Jag's would probably prefer to have downloads and audience and unique size, but time spent with your podcast is really a big deal.
It requires me to restart my podcast, which I need to do because I've podcated my own podcast and not following. Do as I do, not as I say.
The most likely pod faders are podcast producers. Just don't have time.
Shoemaker's kid goes barefoot. That's how it goes.
All right, who wants to go next?
I have another small one that's very recent. And it touched on what David said was that the legacy kind of like old guard media doesn't own podcasting. You, like the average Joe, owns podcasting. What we've seen over the last month, just from the launch of 2 podcasts, should be so encouraging to the everyday person or the everyday business person that wants to get into podcasting, whether it's to market themselves or market their business. We saw Gavin Newsom and Michelle Obama both launch podcasts in the last month. For 2 reasons, that should be really encouraging. One, it means, oh wow, this is a big deal. We've got the governor of California and the former first lady are getting into podcasting. That gives some even further validation to the medium. But 2, they're both terrible at it. Like Michelle Obama is getting clowned all over at least X and on YouTube for her show. And I honestly, I tried to listen to the first episode and just give it some grace and go in with an open mind. It's awful. It's not for me. It's for somebody else, but it's not for me. I mean, clearly it's not for anybody else either, based on the people that are commenting on it. All that to say, the big celebrity podcast dream, that thing's dead. It's not a thing. It's not, this medium is not for those type of people. It is for someone who has something very unique to say and can find an audience in who to say it to, whether that is for marketing your business, whether that is for just doing something extremely, extremely niche, but these really broad conversation-based podcasts like that they're doing, it just isn't working in podcasting. And I find that to be very encouraging for the everyday person, that you guys should not be discouraged that you can never be successful in this because, oh, well, I'll never be Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama's trying it and she freaking sucks at it. So that should not stop you from starting this or trying it.
Can I
Let me
push
give
back?
us. Go ahead,
Please.
Matt.
Yeah, I just want to push back a little bit here because I know that these podcasts, while popular, are getting a lot of attention for as being negative experiences. But even if you're Joe Rogan, you have a 14% share. If you're a top radio station in a city, it's a 6 or a 7 share. That means like 94% of the people are not listening to you. And now, if you're a celebrity in this day and age, if you get like a share number of that range, we now have the rest of the audience who want to target that politician or celebrity and will go and make reels about how bad it is. And I give you Meghan Markle as the latest example of just somebody who, by the way, same thing, like completely failed podcast at Spotify, but is now on whatever, with Netflix, whatever it is that she's doing now. And just people are just bombing her for it. But it's like, Johnny, it's like you just said, though, it's not for you, right? But people are actually going online and saying, this is not for me.
So is it like an all attention is good attention type of thing?
It is. It's just that we have this new dynamic now of people who are being vocal about the things they dislike and using the opportunity of celebrity to propel their own social media platforms.
You're right. That is the correct take. Mine is more just from the sort of a different lens of just like, it should be encouraging to somebody who may have been apprehensive beforehand to be like, oh,
Yeah,
I can do this and I can succeed in doing this.
And let's make no mistake, those two podcasts are dull.
Yes. Yeah. It's just, well, their problem was those are really good case study. Well, maybe not so much Gavin Newsom's, but Michelle's. It's a really good case study in the failure of the broad mass appeal podcast. It's really hard in this day and age to do the sort of just general conversation. No, we're just going to kind of shoot the shit and just hang out and chat because we're just so entertaining and so smart. No, you have to have a niche. You have to have a message. You have to be telling me something because I'm giving you my time that I'm interested in hearing about. And it has to be done well.
2 points there.
Okay.
So, well, go ahead, Catherine. You go first.
No, you go first.
All right. So one, I think these big name celebrity podcasts, they're going to see a lot of downloads out of the gate because they've got a built-in following and people are going to sample it and try it. But to Johnny and Matt's point, if the quality isn't there, those download numbers are just going to fall off a cliff because you can't keep them there. But I think the other encouraging thing here to what we're talking about with these celebrity podcasts, some folks, when they get into podcasting, have this idea it's got to be perfect. It's got to be great right out of the gate. Now, the more prep you can put into it, the better quality you can make it great. But the hardest part about a podcast, about starting a podcast, is actually doing it. Your podcast is not going to set the world on fire in episode 1. I don't have a single client that's gotten 10 episodes that likes how episode 1 sounds. The hardest part is doing it. It's a work in progress. It doesn't have to be Pulitzer Prize winning or Emmy winning out of the gate. Start it and work on it and improve and take feedback and listen to it back and figure out what you can do differently. You don't have to be Joe Rogan or Pod Save America right out of the gate. Or the Daily from the New York Times. Start it. Once you get going, you'll build some momentum and continuously improve. Catherine?
I was going to say, new conspiracy theory has just dropped here live on the podcast Super Friends, is that we all know that negative things spread farther and wider in social media than positive things. So I wonder if there's like a little bit of a hate listen element to all of these things where it's like Netflix is getting all here we are, we're burning up time talking about the Markle mess. People on social media are, putting out, oh, this is so terrible. There's, comments that are going on YouTube. All of this is just furthering that sort of what Johnny was just saying, that all attention is good attention or bad attention is, there's no such thing as bad press. There's no such thing as a bad click. So maybe I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a, in the same way that we love to read a terrible or hear a terrible movie review of just trashing a movie, I wonder if there's something to be said for this too, or there's something fun about seeing, having somebody say, oh, this is just a total disaster. This is a mess. And let's tell everybody about it.
They ultimately have to spin it into something good though, because if the only thing people are hearing is that this podcast sucks, then, your brother's uncle's neighbor's dog is going to go, hey, did you hear about the Michelle Obama? She launched a podcast. Be like, yeah, I heard it sucked. And then I move on with my day. Now that that brand is now stained forever as something negative.
Loving counterpoint, Spotify gave them so much money. The Markle and Prince Harry gave them a wheelbarrow full of money to do a podcast. It was considered poor. This Netflix show is after that. They're still raking in projects.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nuts. I frankly, if I was a wealthy woman, I would fund a investigative reporter to get to the bottom on how they keep these contracts. I really would like to know.
Well, honestly, Catherine, I think part of it is their celebrity status is they're going to start off with a built-in audience that any of the 5 of us are not going to start out with. Okay, and they're trying to get a piece of that, but it's all smoke and mirrors if the quality isn't there to back it up.
I have another Spotify note if the chair will entertain it.
Entertained.
Okay.
Speaking of which, yes.
Yeah. Spotify, come over here, sit down. Let's have a little talk. Spotify, like other platforms, can be concerned about the copyrighted material being illegally published on their site. So publish a podcast that has some copyrighted material, it might get flagged. Now, I do have a law degree. I don't want to go legal on anyone here, but if you're wondering what the law is, according to the fair use exception to the Federal Copyright Act, if you are using material for the purposes of commentary, criticism, parody, news reporting, then it is okay to do so. Now, if you're just playing entire songs on your show, or you've chosen some Pearl Jam song to be your theme song to your podcast just because you like it, you didn't ask their permission, then yeah, you got yourself a copyright violation. If you're using small bits of things and clips of things, like I do occasionally, then
Where?
they may get. Well, it's funny you ask, Catherine. I do have this music podcast. It's called Past Tense. And we do comment. The whole purpose of the podcast is to comment on music. So, long story, a little shorter. Spotify would occasionally send me missives that said, we flagged some copyrighted material. Please choose one of the following. And it's like, I'll take it down. I own it. It's not copyrighted by anybody else. Or 3, I am not using this improperly. I don't know if it uses that double negative, but in other words, I'm permitted to use this in the way that I am using it. And typically I would check that box and send it back to them, and usually the issue solved. But recently they've been cracking down on this, and they're getting pressure from the record companies who are going to Spotify and demanding that they take down certain podcasts and channels and size songs or whatever. So recently I get an email that says that your Spotify account has been suspended. So they bar me. Now, Spotify, we got off to such a good start. I'm one of your Spotify for creators. I've published probably 3 dozen podcasts on your site, giving out making this content available to all of your listeners. I never asked for any money or anything like that, or even a thank you. And you cancel me. Now, when this happened, I was horrified because I thought all the podcasts I produce are not going to be on Spotify anymore. That's not the case. The podcasts are still there. I just had to open an entire new account, and now I got to figure a way to, if I want to monitor this or look at the analytics for any of my pods on Spotify. But clearly, they've taken this barbaric approach. Spotify, do better. What I imagine is happening is there is no human dealing with this issue at all. I think it's a robot that has flagged it, a robot that has sent
an agent, Dave.
AI agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. An evil secret agent. And, I think after you get a certain amount of these emails saying you're violated, they automatically terminate the account. So get it together, Spotify. Yeah. And I tweeted them on that Spotify cares and heard nothing back, which begs the question, if it's Spotify cares, and do they really, Spotify really care?
Well, it's between you and the Island Def Jam executive who came kicking in the door going, there's this podcast called Past 10.
All right.
I have a theory,
Yes.
and I think that it's Spotify is constantly trying to renegotiate their deal with the record labels. I think the record labels are saying, okay, we'll do something with you, but you got to clean this up. Namely, Top 10 Time Machine. You've got to go and get rid of that, and then clean up all this
To be
stuff.
clear, Past Tense is still on Spotify. It's just its host got his account.
You got the boot.
So I like to lurk in the Facebook groups and somebody said my show's no longer on Spotify, and I went and found out what show it was, and then I listened to 2 or 3 episodes, and I took the songs, and I didn't know the songs, so I used my Shazam to find out what the songs were, and I said, you got this song, and this song, and you're using this as a theme song. You've literally been booted from Spotify because of this.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I understand they got to police it somehow, and there are certain things that you can't do, but it's just it's frustrating for someone like me doing a music podcast, which if our fans, what are our fans going to do if they enjoy the show? They're going to listen to more music. They're going to listen to Spotify more. They're going to listen to artists in the typical way. They don't come to our show to listen to songs. They want to hear what we have to say, but I guess they want to hear what we.
Yeah, there's another
Apple
line.
Podcast never reaches out to you about this. It's only Spotify.
Correct. Knock on wood.
Yeah, I mean YouTube is worse, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
insane.
YouTube is similarly cruel, yes, and unyielding, but
Well, and what YouTube will do is YouTube will contact the creator directly and let them know that their content is being copyrighted. So if so like on one of the podcasts I manage, occasionally, a guest on the show will say like, "Hey, can we have a copy of the episode so that we can post it on our YouTube channel?" And of course, they clear it with us. We're like, "Yeah, of course you can do it." So we'll post it. I will give them the full video. They will upload it. I will get a notification on YouTube from my host's channel saying like, "Hey, this other channel is copywriting your content. Potentially, you should check it out." And I will look on there and it'll say using 100% of your content, and it'll show the video. But I'll see that it's the episode that we shared with them. And it all depends on whether people are really, crazy about monetization and whether they feel like they're being stolen from. But again, the fair use thing should have cleared all that up, where it's like, if we're using this to comment on it and we're playing little bits and pieces, pausing it and then talking about it, that totally falls under fair use. And it's just, it's
But
just,
it really does seem
crazy.
that they've put the burden on the creator when it comes to fair use issues. They're very unsympathetic, and they make it so it's upon you, the podcaster, to jump through all the hoops to make sure it gets through. And if you watch any YouTube at all, you know that the YouTube creators have had this problem for a very long time.
oh yeah,
So it's really trying to, kind of please both sides. I know, for example, YouTube, I have a subscription service where I download, music to use intro, outro for podcast, not Welcome to the Jungle from Guns N' Roses, but,
Right.
but, compositions that have been created for this purpose. And when these podcasts go on YouTube, I have to make sure I download a copy of the YouTube license when I download the audio file, because when the podcast launches, invariably the trailer episodes 1 and 2, they will send that notification to the creator of said music and say, "You have a claim against this. Do you want to appeal it?" And I appeal it, and I copy paste the license that I got from the music provider, and then it's fine within 24 hours. So I applaud them for trying to, protect the creators, but I don't want them to hurt us as creators either. It's a really fine line.
Well, Spotify, please look away when the new account set up by Navid Daz gets
oh, it's already there.
no connection.
Welcome back to our new podcast, Hot Tub Time Machine.
I'm not gonna. The podcast, fine. It's just me. I'm public enemy number one. But yes, I did just open another Spotify account. I'm not going to tell you when.
That, as you're my attorney, you don't.
I'm using.
Matt,
Don't incriminate yourself.
When we do the post-production episode of this, can we put like the Mel Gibson music?
Never take my
behind
freedom.
it? Yeah, that whatever song that was over David's spiel.
Yeah.
Welcome to this new podcast, Past Nines. Very quickly, since we're on the topic of podcast hosts, yesterday I learned that you no longer need an Apple account to create to put a podcast in Apple Podcasts. I'm still kind of
20
old
years
school.
later.
I know it says the Apple hater in our group, but
We're testing the 11th version of the iPad Air to fix this.
and the 10th software update this week. I have mixed emotions about this because I'm kind of old school. I like having everything tied to an Apple account, whether it's the client's podcast or it's my central account that I use to submit everything to Apple, so I have it all in one place and I can look at everything all at once. You can claim the podcast without an Apple podcast, or Apple ID rather. To me, all you need for an Apple ID is name, email address, and a credit card. They do not charge to be on Apple Podcasts. So I'm still going to use the Apple Podcast login way to do it. But if you really don't want to give the folks in Cupertino too much information and don't want the Apple ID, then you can actually claim the podcast and submit it without having an Apple ID. So that was what I learned yesterday.
Have you tried doing that? Or like, have you done like a high level walkthrough of that process? Because we just launched a podcast, and I still went through the deal of how we've normally been doing it, where you have to manually hit publish in Podcast Connect on Apple.
Mhm. I haven't. I actually did a Zoom screen share with a client who asked me about this new piece of it, and we went through and looked at it for her podcast. But she'd already created it through her own Apple ID, and she was good. But it was a real learning experience for me, for anybody who's starting out that doesn't have an Apple ID.
So I have a question. Is this going to make it easier for us to share Apple data with, say, clients?
That's a great question.
Great
Potentially.
question.
All right.
Or is it going to be claimed by only one user? So that probably remains to be seen, I would think.
Yeah. So I'll get back to everybody on this, and I'll report back in a month when we do our next episode.
We are almost at time. We've got a couple minutes left. Anybody have any points they want to hit before we close things up?
We'll talk about Pocket Cast shortly. They've got a web version that's out. I think that's a good thing. What happens if you want to, watch a podcast or listen to a podcast on the web? What options are really out there? Well, Pocket Casts has come up with one. This has sort of given me a little bit of incentive to add the Pocket Cast banner to some of our websites. So I'm going to see how this sort of develops over the next month. I think it's a good thing.
Do creators need to submit to Pocket Cast, or does it pull from another feed like
It
Apple?
pulls from the Apple API.
Terrific. Okay.
But ultimately, Pocket Cast is trying to make a play for taking away some listeners from Spotify and Apple by having a web player.
I think they're realizing that this is there's a hole in the market for this.
Oh, interesting.
This is to listen on the web, Matt, you said, as opposed to on an app?
Yeah, exactly. Takes you to a web page. Every one of our podcasts now has a Pocket Cast page that is dedicated. So, makes it easy.
And
Anything you can do to connect the listener to your show in an easy way is great.
Fish where the fish are.
And
But
I believe it's
that's
Pocket.
that's a pushback on the YouTube thing. If you don't want to have your podcast on YouTube, then what's the difference between fish where the fish are? Because if all the big fish are on YouTube, the minnows are on Pocket Cast. So why wouldn't you be on both?
Well, the minute you're on Apple, you're on Pocket Cast, whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but wouldn't you want to be on YouTube then?
I want to have that conversation because I'll have it.
We are out of time.
I have one point on podcasts. I've actually heard from podcasters, independent podcasters, that because Pocket Cast actually offers a feature where you can advertise your podcast and have it sponsored to listeners, people who are already listening to podcasts, that's sort of been an fully shouted out method of promoting your podcast, is that people really saw a nice, when they would have their podcast be sponsored to other podcast listeners, they would get a nice bump in their downloads. So that would be something I'd be interested in seeing a little bit more of.
That's different from Overcast.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I have one more yesterday I learned. Yesterday I learned, and we all know the email. We've already talked about email in this particular episode too. A lot of podcasts have email newsletters that go along with their topics, or if you're working with companies, they've got newsletters for the public to use. And I just learned that Beehive has a automatic sponsorship option, so that you can turn your newsletter into a way to monitor a revenue stream by having sponsors for your newsletter through Beehive. Now, Matt, I think do you use Beehive?
Yeah, I do.
Has anybody heard of this or experimented with this at all? What was specifically with like the sponsor
Not
option?
with that specific feature, but everything that I'm being fed about Beehive online, it is that it is the newsletter platform.
Primo.
It is the
Yeah, they
place
seem to really
be
get
over
it.
Substack, over WordPress, it is the place to be.
Wow. Okay. I would be interested in because I think that having as many options as connecting, or even if they're just multiple streams of income, even if they're rivulets of income, these are going to be important things for podcasters to know about. So I would love to hear a little bit more about podcasters that are using Beehive and using this automatic sponsorship option to get some revenue flowing with their newsletters.
That is a wonderful place to leave it. I was trying to make a B transition, but I couldn't come up with one. So let's run around the room. And since her mic has been working for the last hour, let's start with Catherine.
Yes, let's not tempt fate anymore. I can finally move my head. This is Catherine O'Brien from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the Red Stick, and it's been my pleasure talking with you. You can listen to me shouting into the void on Twitter. Hello, Catherine O.
To Canada. Now Spain, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. We're in Malaga, Spain for right through until Easter. Matt Kundle. You can find me on X while I'm still there at Matt Kundle.
Texas.
I'm
Fort Worth. Hello.
I'm Johnny Podcast. You can follow me on X at Johnny Podcasts, and soon you'll be able to find me at johnnypodcast.com.
Nice.
Look forward to
Tease
that.
it.
Nice tease. Boston, hello.
Boston. It is pod617.com, Boston Podcast Network. Baseball season. Go Sox. Come on. Come on, Jag. Go
Go
Sox.
Sox. Go Sox. All right. Alex Bregman. John Gay, Jag In Detroit Podcasts. You can find me at jagindetroit.com. I'm focusing on internal comms podcasts and podcasts for financial advisors. So if either one of those means anything to you, you can find me on my website or on social at Jag In Detroit. Thanks so much for checking out this month's Podcast Super Friends. For Johnny, Matt, Catherine, David, and myself, we will see you next month.
Thanks for listening to the Podcast Super Friends. For a transcript of the show or to connect with the Super Friends, go to the show notes of this episode or go to soundoff.network.